Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on long duration energy storage. Thank you for being here with us. We are in the thick of the energy transition. We just had Minnesota become the 22nd state that adopted a policy to fully decarbonize electric generation. That's 22 states that have committed to either complete 100% clean energy or some kind of net zero mechanism where some of the fossil generation is offset. But that's 22 states that have committed to that. And we're starting to see the effects of that. Last year in the US, 2/3 of all new electric generation came from wind and solar. Now, as we're moving down this course, as we're starting to see more and more of our generation come from renewable sources, we're faced with this challenge because our demand isn't really variable. Our demand isn't that flexible. We can flex some things, we can flex when we do our laundry, when we charge our EV. But really, we're really dependent on electricity, more and more dependent. We don't have a lot of tolerance for interruptions in our services. And so what we're seeing now is that as our generation becomes more and more variable, but our demand stays relatively fixed, we need something to bridge those gaps. Those gaps between when electricity is being created and when it's being used are getting bigger, they're getting longer. So we really need long duration energy storage to start stepping in and taking on some of that, start reconciling some of that mismatch. So one of the things that we're doing here at PNNL is developing the Grid Storage Launchpad to really serve as a resource to rapidly develop new sources of energy storage technology. But we still have this lingering question about long duration energy storage. How much do we need? Where do we need it? When do we need it? What's going to provide it? These topics are near and dear to my heart. I could talk about this for an hour myself, and if you've been to some of our previous webinars, you know that. Fortunately for all of you, that's not what we're doing here today. I brought some friends. Hi, friends. When I was asked to put together a webinar about long duration energy storage, these were the first 3 names that came to mind, so I'm really glad that we were able to get them. We're really fortunate to be able to hear from these experts and what they're working on. So I will leave it to them to tell you a little bit about themselves and what they're working on. After each speaker, we'll have a brief Q&A, and then with the time we have left, we'll have a broader Q&A. So Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, friend. It's good to see you, and it's great to be everybody. Yeah, it's wonderful to be working in this industry and have so many friends that you get to collaborate on and really kind of help push the agenda and truly get excited over what we're all working on and what we need to achieve, especially in this short period of time. So I'm just going to jump right in because as we're all experiencing around the world, we have, and next slide, please. Thanks. We're all experiencing climate events every month, every week, every community. I mean, just this last month, 30% of Pakistan was underwater. And so every week there is a new challenge we're dealing with. Oh, sorry. Thanks. It's the ghost speaking. So really just wanted to highlight that, we're really working in this global nexus to highlight all these different net zero targets. And it's great to hear that 22 states are moving towards this. And it's really exciting to see around the world the constant update for long duration energy storage targets, for new renewable energy goals, for decarbonization targets and plans. And what we're really trying to demonstrate is how long duration energy storage is essential to meeting these targets and how we're working to scale up the marketplace, provide benefits to society, providing security, flexibility, resiliency, and affordability. And what we're really working with partners and colleagues, around the United States, around the world, is just that every sector of our economy is going to have a component of long duration energy storage. And it's really essential to really incorporate how critical the role of long duration energy storage is, whether it's with transportation, aviation, ports, chemicals, mining industry, electrification, buildings, so agriculture. All of these areas need to have clean energy, and with that, they need the flexibility and reliability that long duration can provide. And so just a quick overview of the council. We are a global organization based in Brussels that was announced at COP26. We have now grown to over 60 companies in over 21 countries. We just had 2 more join this week. And we're really thrilled to bring together this unique partnership because it's not just the diverse technologies of long duration that really highlight all 4 types of long duration storage: chemical, thermal, electrochemical, mechanical, but we also have customers capital providers, equipment manufacturers, developers, system integrators, all coming together to work and validate this important role of long duration to meet the net zero targets. And we're doing this, as we really promote how we're decarbonizing and scaling up long duration. Again, we're global and we produce a lot of reports to help, really give facts and figures of why this market needs to change. And what a slide that so many people love and ask for is to really better understand the diversity of long duration. So within thermal energy storage, you can see the different types of heating and solids and thermochemical waste heat recovery. You also see, the different temperature ranges from 150 degrees Celsius up to 2000 degrees. And you can see that the possibilities with green steam, with off-grid infrastructure, with just kind of, again, the circular economy, sustainability, using low-cost resources. And electrochemical, we don't have lithium ion and short duration is important, but what we really want to show is the diversity of different types of batteries, whether it's flow batteries, zinc, iron, aluminum, calcium, nickel. There's so many different salts. It can be aqueous. So the zinc and the different bromine, different combinations, and what can be available, whether it's small scale, off-grid, microgrid, remote systems, or urban centers, large scale. This diversity is critical. And building upon the decades of expertise from pumped hydro, new technologies and innovations coming to market, whether it's underground, above ground, with compressed air, liquefied air, closed loop systems, different types of processes that are really kind of highlighting and building upon shared expertise and experience. And then hydrogen is chemical. So one thing just wanted to jump into is building on Jeremy's point of the speed and the acknowledgement of how we have to move fast to address decarbonization and our net zero targets and what's happening around the world. We hear a lot in the media about the IRA and the great incentives and the work and the kind of competition that's happening. But what's also thrilling to see is that behind all the headlines, there are a lot of partnerships that are forming and a lot of initiation to kind of everyone move forward of how to bring energy security to their local communities, but at the same time, understanding the value chain of still how globally interconnected we are and how we really need to make sure that as we improve all of our markets, how to move them all forward and bring long duration energy storage into it. So just highlighted a few countries here. In the next few weeks, we're going to hear some big announcements from the European Commission on their new capacity market structure. We're thrilled to see and hear that storage is going to play an important role and how the awareness of long duration energy storage, also providing that flexibility, reliability, and security. Spain is working on targets this year as they transition to being have the presidency of the EU. Greece, they have some amazing kind of auction systems that they're working on with their 27 large islands that are interconnected to their mainland, and just kind of different systems and the value out of long duration. Australia has 2 states where they have long duration energy storage targets and improving their market. India has a portfolio approach. Canada has been working a lot on their net zero targets and incorporating long duration energy storage. Indonesia, Thailand. There's so much amazing work going on. This is just a handful of the work globally where the acknowledgement and the critical role of long duration energy storage is playing a more prevalent role. And along this lines, it's really important to show the partnerships. All of us on the call today, work together and continue to share data, insights, expertise. And this is critical if we all want to move fast and efficient, to meet the next 2-year goals, 5-year goals, 10-year goals. And EEI and EPRI, Department of Energy, form as one of our members, many other groups, all collaborating to really kind of collaborate and also just note the important facts of the cost savings and the affordability and the reliability that long duration energy storage can provide. So working with all these different organizations, and we work with many more weekly and annually, is to really kind of leverage each other's expertise and power and know-how so we can all kind of bring information to various communities around the world. For example, greening the islands all over the world are working on how to replace backup diesel generators. And there are a variety of options. Now, working with these different alliances, we can, move faster on inclusive planning, move faster on providing information for various solutions and different types of LDES that can meet their needs. So it's great that we have this expanding partnership and look forward to more. And exciting. I'm sure that you're going to hear from Justin and around this too, but just today we announced the MOU, this partnership among the U.S. Department of Energy, EPRI, and EEI, and the Long Duration Energy Storage Council to work on really bringing the balance to the transition, really demonstrating that all these industries in the United States can collaborate and help bring long duration into the utilities portfolios faster, work on better coordinated planning, work on data. Justin's got a great tool about storagevet.org on their website, the fact that you can go and get all this information. So now bringing us all together will really strengthen our partnerships and be able to accelerate the marketplace. So you can see a lot more LDES diverse technologies coming into the various energy systems. And so want to just highlight again, as we're working in these collaborations and how critical this is to the marketplace, the criteria for each of these components, energy security, data access and sharing, inclusive planning, equitable transitions. What does flexibility mean? How are you addressing the energy shifting throughout the days, the weeks, the months, the seasons? And as we're really all striving towards replace fossil fuels, what does it look like? And so this is something in these partnerships we're working on, expanding the criteria and bringing together this kind of continuity of how to make sure that LDES, again, is being accounted for, giving credit, and continues to build and strengthen the ecosystem. So we have 4 reports on our website. I just wanted to highlight that, this kind of been an amazing collaboration with Mackenzie and our members on sharing a lot of data and getting a lot of information out there. I wanted to pull from the public policy toolkit, the journey to net zero today, and kind of show a little bit of the policy aspects and the creation of various markets to start some dialogue, and look forward to continuing to build some more case studies and share insights of the market changes that are happening this year that are going to affect change tomorrow. So as Jeremy noted, we're having more and more renewable energy integration, in the States, but also around the world. And they're really starting to become a precipice of just when you have 30-40% of renewable energies, how much you need that flexibility and energy shifting with, and how you can meet this with long duration energy storage. And many of us are kind of very familiar with lithium ion, and we're just trying to demonstrate here that when you bring in long duration energy storage into the equation, the cost savings become enormous. And the fact that you can also really just kind of see the changes from the 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, 80% integration of renewable energy. So again, just kind of showing that there is kind of a huge opportunity to debunk the myths that this is super expensive and that's not working today. I mean, we have long duration storage technologies that are actually commercialized in the marketplace, and some of them in different places around the world have been there for over 10 years. And pumped hydro has been there for almost a century. But really just trying to show again the benefit of meeting the flexibility that is required, because the variable generation from clean energy with long duration energy storage does give you that 24/7 certainty. So here's, kind of jumping into kind of the policy market aspects. If you're looking at different components of, looking at transmission distribution optimization. So maybe you need to build a transmission line, but just timing and permitting, it's going to be 10 years or 15 years. So in the meantime, you can use storage as a transmission asset. What are different tools that we can use? 24/7 clean power purchase agreements. Looking again at island nations and how to repurpose and utilize existing grid infrastructure. And then, again, remote systems, mining industry, just kind of looking at all these different cases, and then, what you can achieve with long duration energy storage, and the type of, kind of value add where you can really get the IRR and return. So the economics are there. And as we're really trying to show too, is that this is looking at the power side. When you bring in the heat side, there's, additional savings too. And it also just, sorry, one last thing I want to put on the other slide is just, having strong long-term market signals is critical. It provides, and having regulatory certainty to elevate the market signals. We're seeing this more and more, and just want to reiterate that this is something that we're very familiar with. And we just know that, moving forward, these existing tools that we have can be incorporated and adapted to long duration energy storage. So just looking at some numbers here on, again, the power side, want to just kind of show that as you're really trying to look at some of the power capacity and energy capacity, and just looking at the value creation, again, the billions of dollars that you can save you can kind of get a better sense of the CapEx and OpEx. But again, there, we're showing in our studies that it's $540 billion a year of savings when you bring long duration energy storage into the marketplace. And in down below, you can see in the graph too, just looking at different markets. And this data also is, about 6 months old, and as we're evolving just from the kind of next area, just wanted to show you that there's many markets looking at long duration energy storage and just already starting to see the savings. Also the duration, you can kind of see whether it's 10 hours, 20 hours, 75, 100 hours. Again, there's a range depending on the marketplace. So I'll skip this one, leave it for more examples that you can kind of dig into a little later. But again, the partnerships are key to making this happen. I mentioned the $540 billion of savings, and then also just wanted to leave with you, upcoming webinars that we're doing too with partners to just kind of participate in and just learn more about our members, the diverse technologies, and just kind of dive into our favorite topic of long duration energy storage. I'll speak back to the questions, but I want to hand it over to our colleagues.
All right. Thank you, Julia, for that excellent overview. I'm not seeing questions in the chat. If you do have them, go ahead and type them in. While people are doing that, I had a couple of questions for you. So I noticed that, among your membership, there's a really good mix of, early stage technologies, early commercial technologies, mature technologies. I'm wondering for those early technologies, what are you hearing from your members in terms of what they need to really scale up and get to commercial stage? Like, is it research and development? Is it pilot funding? Is it market design? Like, what are you hearing from them?
What's exciting is that in less than 5 years, we've had $26 billion invested in storage and long duration. Out of this number, it's pretty much all equity. And so what some of the initial groups want is more debt, and they kind of want to see more additional help with warranties. We have in the last year, more traditional banks knocking on our door to talk about the overall capital stack. That like 2 years ago wasn't happening. So just the transition with banks has been huge. Now it's also insurance companies. So having more insurance companies come in and talk to those groups that don't have those boxes checked yet in the checklist, helps move along the whole early stage developers kind of pushing the new innovation. I think what's also exciting is how they're leveraging the partnerships and the knowledge from what works with pumped hydro, what works with compressed air, why their components meet ESG targets, how they can really provide that circular economy. And another big component is supply chains. With long duration storage, we don't have a lot of the same threats that other industries do, just because of the diverse technologies, also because diverse marketplace, and so many of the resources are either local or just extremely low cost.
Okay, wow, that is interesting. I wasn't aware that the smart money was showing up already. That's good to hear. And then I guess just kind of building on that, you mentioned some technologies that they're at the pilot phase, they're early commercial phase. They've had some demonstration projects in Europe and elsewhere. Are there any key barriers you're seeing towards the adoption of those technologies here in the US?
I think some of it is just, clarifying some of the myths and the just kind of misnomers. There's a lot of assumptions being made about LDES that are just incorrect. And so when I've been speaking with different utilities, understanding that, this can actually replace a coal plant. This actually can replace a peaker plant today. The thermal energy storage can provide heat and power and has steam with renewable energy. There's all these benefits to flow batteries, and there's benefits to these different types of areas where you can kind of learn from wildfire replacement, and the fact that there's a lot of the technologies kind of can provide those security aspects of providing the community centers with power, being able to roll things out, just again, kind of bringing awareness that this has happened before in other countries, and that they've been providing that flexibility and certainty. And so I think it's just sharing the stories of what works and then just trying to continue to improve upon them.
Awesome, thank you for that. We're getting a couple audience questions coming in now. I want to hit one of those before we move on. So Anna Sommer asks, utility modeling of LDS is still nascent. Some utilities say we can model compressed air energy storage as to represent any form, or an 8-hour lithium ion battery, and that'll represent any form of LDS. They've been hesitant to model specific types of LDS, specific operational characteristics. Do you have a particular opinion on this topic and what utilities ought to be modeling in their plans, how they ought to be modeling energy storage, long-duration energy storage?
That's a great question, and one that we're thrilled to be working with EPRI, and the EEI, and the U.S. Department of Energy on, because we all understand that there's some modeling barriers. We've been working with different groups of trying to even just give the same characteristics as LDES to what they do to gas plants. And so we're seeing that actually change some of the dialogue. Also just long-term planning, changing some of the scenarios. These are easy fixes today, but we are working to actually expand the modeling capability. And this is something you're going to see in the next, hopefully, year and a half, that we can actually have some very significant changes. But this partnership that we just announced is going to be this is one of the deliverables on data. It's a great question. Thanks.
Yeah, glad to hear it. Thank you. So I see a couple more questions. Patrick, I see your question. I'm going to put a pin in that one. Going to come back to that one first when we get to the end of session Q&A. Want to move on to our next participant. Julia, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us and what LDS Council is up to. It's a lot. We're glad to hear about it. So yeah, let's go ahead and turn things over to Justin Roddy from EPRI.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Jeremy. Can you hear me okay? I apologize for doing this from my phone today.
Sounds great.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be here to talk about my favorite topic as well. I think Julie and I share that interest, which is long duration energy storage. Just very briefly, I'm a principal project manager here at EPRI, focused on a variety of energy storage technologies in our bulk energy storage group. And I'll give you a couple of remarks today on our view of energy storage broadly and some various use cases and the way energy storage brings value to the grid in a system planning perspective. Next slide, please. So very briefly, if you're not familiar with EPRI, we are an independent research institute. We've been around for 50 years, and we're very proud of our heritage on developing advanced technologies in collaboration with our utility members who fund our work. We focus on making electricity reliable and affordable and clean, as now we are expanding our work into a broad area of energy related topics, including industrial process heat and low carbon fuels, in addition to our electricity focused work. Next slide, please. So with energy storage specifically, we do a lot of different collaborative projects with our members and other stakeholders. We develop and track a large number of emerging energy storage technologies. There's over 80 technologies in our database right now and growing rapidly. We do technology assessments and assess the cost and performance of these technologies. We do detailed cost and benefits analysis to quantify not only the cost, but how much value they provide on a grid and a system. That's what our DERVET and Regen tools are for, and I'll speak about those briefly later on today. We also, in some cases, lead pilot projects to demonstrate new energy storage technologies. So for example, we are currently leading an innovative concrete thermal energy storage pilot project with a Southern company as a site host using that emerging technology for storing energy. And we hope to one day get to managing a portfolio of deployed assets, which are long duration energy storage resources, and optimizing the operations and maintenance of those assets in the future grid system. Next slide, please. So we've seen the trend that I'm sure is familiar to many people in the audience, is that when you deploy more variable solar and wind and hydro, in some cases, you typically need more storage and you need longer duration storage to complement those variable and renewable energy sources. And so this is a trend that's been well documented and is something we're seeing now, that we're shifting from typically short duration, 4-hour type energy storage resources and seeing more value and more procurement for 8 hours and longer. And we expect that trend will continue going forward. We'll start to look at mid-duration, 12 hours, multiple days, over 100 hours potentially, and eventually out to seasonal energy storage durations. And so it's going to be not a one-size-fits-all scenario, but multiple applications and technologies and use cases in a portfolio of resources on the grid. Next slide, please. So we're tracking here at EPRI many different technology types. They cover the whole spectrum of different ways to store energy, including electrochemical batteries, thermal energy storage technology that store heat, and things like concrete and sand and molten salt. We're tracking a number of mechanical energy storage technologies, including compressed air and gravitational based technologies. And finally, also chemical energy storage technologies that store energy in chemical reactions. Next slide, please. But like I said, it's not going to be a one size fits all. It's going to take all of these technologies in different ways, different forms, to really meet the need for all the use cases we see on the grid. And so if we look at it in terms of duration, so we have hours and minutes with lithium-ion batteries and flywheels. We have days of storage potential from mechanical and thermal and novel electrochemical batteries. Weeks and seasonal durations are probably more suitable for things like thermochemical and chemical energy storage technologies that can be on standby for weeks to months if needed. But it's not going to be storage, which is just one thing, right? It's going to be a combination that makes the whole system more resilient and lower cost for ratepayers. Next slide, please. So I'll very briefly walk you through a couple of use cases that we see as the kind of in terms of different durations and what value that provides to the grid. Next slide, please. So the first use case that we're probably most familiar with is the diurnal charge and discharge scenario with typically a 4-hour type energy storage resource. So this is looking at California data, which is very typical of the sunny Southwest area, where you want to be able to charge in the middle of the day when there's a lot of abundant low carbon energy generation, and then discharge in the peak to meet the peak loads in the evenings, which typically happen as the sun goes down and it stays hot outside and the peak load extends into the evening hours. And so this is very common, and we're seeing more of these resources deployed to meet this use case across the grid, this kind of 4-hour charge and discharge diurnal use case. Next slide, please. And moving on from that, we see that the success of these 4-hour storage resources really makes the case for longer duration storage up to about 12 hours for this diurnal use case. As you deploy more 4-hour or shorter duration storage, you tend to shave the peak load events, but you make that peak load event longer. So it makes it's broader. And so with enough shorter duration storage deployed, that peak load ends up being about 12 hours long, right? So you have with a mixture of storage resources, you're going to have a need for some portion of that to be a 12-hour type resource for that daily mismatch between supply and demand. Next slide, please. And going beyond that, we see the need for multiple days of energy storage. So this is an example from the upper Midwest in Minnesota, when you can see there were multiple days, 3 or 4 days in a row, when there was little solar and little wind. And in German, this is called Dunkelflaute, which is my favorite German word, which is basically the dark, quiet times when you have very little renewable output. And how do you ride through those periods when there's no renewable output, especially in a grid that's dominated by renewable energy? One possible way to do that is to deploy storage that can last for up to 100 hours, multiple days in a row, to provide that kind of firm capacity and ride through those periods that happen every year at different times. Next slide, please. And extending this out to even longer, we see the need for 500 hours or more of seasonal energy storage to basically charge in the spring and the fall when there's excess renewable energy generation, especially if there's more renewable energy deployed on the grid, and to discharge in the summer and winter months to meet peak load. So skip forward one more slide, please. And one more. There we go. Yeah, and one more click, please. So this is how you can see the example use case that I mentioned. One more click, please, on the slide. You'll see that we've kind of identified the need for some kind of resource that can charge for multiple months in a row and discharge for weeks to months as well in different seasons, and really balance that supply and demand mismatch between renewable energy production. So that's a much different type of resource than a typical 4-hour lithium-ion battery. I think there's many technologies that are more suitable for this 500-hour plus use case, which is something we're actively working with here at EPRI. Next slide, please. So you can take a look at this when you have a minute on a previous workshop and white paper we published on the seasonal energy storage topic last year. It kind of lays out the framework for how to identify possible technologies and ways to make projects viable with a seasonal energy storage use case. But for now, please skip to the next slide. I want to finish up with this slide. So this is really the take-home lesson that I'm trying to convey today, is that it's going to take a portfolio of energy storage technologies similar to what we have in our current generation mix, where we have baseload power, intermediate power, and peaking power resources. we see a similar kind of application for energy storage, right? We're going to have short duration storage for peaking resources, mid duration storage for the shoulder type application, and seasonal storage potentially for that base load, longer duration type use case. And so you can see here, this is some work that we did with our regen system modeling tool, which is really kind of a capacity expansion modeling package. We see lower total system costs when a portfolio of energy storage technologies is included in a capacity expansion scenario. So we wanted to include, in this example, a carbon-free scenario where there's no carbon capture and storage allowed, which is the case in some areas of the country just because of various constraints. And so you can see with all the technologies included, in this case, we had short duration storage, we had some mechanical and thermal storage technologies, and also the hydrogen playing the role of the seasonal storage. The total system delivery cost was about $60 per megawatt hour, which is substantially less than $78 per megawatt hour when we had only short duration energy storage available. So I think, there's a lot of nuances, and we're going to continue this kind of work this year and update this study to include different technologies, updated costs, and really quantify the benefit to the system of having a wide range of storage. I understand is that it's when it comes to energy storage and long duration energy storage in particular. So with that, I will finish up my remarks and be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. I love that word. Was it Dunkelflaute? The German word?
That's right.
Okay, we just we published an article a couple months ago where we called them wind droughts, and I wish I had known about that word when we did it. I like that word a lot better. If you have questions for Justin, get them into chat while that's happening. We heard from Julia a little bit about some of the modeling adaptations that are required to identify LDS needs. You've talked about the modeling work you've done to get at some of those needs. What type of specific modeling changes were you making to be able to identify those needs compared to the way we usually operate capacity expansion models?
Sure. Yeah. So I think part of the issue is that, capacity expansion models don't really typically have storage baked in as a possible resource. And so that's been a big effort on our part at EPRI, is to look at each technology, understand its performance metrics and its expected cost, in future scenarios, and add those as possible resources for regen to select from and deploy and dispatch in future scenarios. So it's really an exercise in staying very close to the market and which technologies are emerging and how to incorporate those into resource planning tools, because historically they didn't exist, right? And so, but we're often looking at scenarios that are 2030, 2035, and even further in the future when we expect there's going to be multiple technologies available. And it's we have to extrapolate what the marketplace could be at that time, but that's something that's, I think, important to do in these future scenarios.
Okay. So these technology options that you're adding, like how diverse of a portfolio of storage options are in there? Are we talking, is there like a 4-hour product and an 8-hour product and a 12-hour product, or tell us a little bit more about those specific options?
The beauty of one strength of regen is that it can deploy a storage resource and can basically independently size the charge and the storage capacity, the discharge capacity. So it can just deploy, say, 1,000 megawatt hours of a given technology and discharge that over 4 hours, or it can discharge it over 10 hours or 20 hours or whatever is required to meet load throughout the course of the year. So we typically try and kind of put these technologies into buckets. Like we have one technology that might be a thermal type technology that has relatively lower round trip efficiency, but lower capital cost. We might have some technology that's like a electrochemical or mechanical storage technology with higher capital cost, but higher RTE. And then technologies that are in between, combinations of those two. And then regen is able to select those technologies and deploy those appropriately to minimize the total system cost and achieve the greenhouse gas reduction targets.
Okay, great. Thank you for that detail. We have a question in the chat from William Conlon, who's asking if you can elaborate on the annual system costs. Those are averages, and presumably the LDES components are more costly. What does your regen model suggest as the range of costs for LDES and the corresponding range of capacity factors? Yes. So that's a good question, Bill. So thanks for the comment. So the numbers I cited were the total delivered cost of energy, right? The total system cost, including capital cost, O&M cost, and variable costs
delivering energy throughout the course of the year to ratepayers, right? So that was the $60 to $78 per megawatt hour range I cited. It didn't break down the total cost of each resource. I think that's important. It might be beneficial for the system to have a very high CapEx project that's a high cost per kilowatt, but if it's the only resources available to meet the 500-hour need in a given scenario in 1 year, then maybe it's the best resource to have to some extent in the portfolio to minimize the total system costs. So I don't have hard numbers for you in terms of what storage has to cost in order to be viable. I think it highly depends on the use case and what else is deployed along with it in a complete portfolio perspective.
Okay. All right, and then we have thank you for that. We have a quick one from Ross asking, which of the storage categories would you say pumped hydro fits in? Is it thermal, mechanical?
I guess that would be more of a mechanical gravitational based technology, right? And we certainly, we are familiar with many of those projects. We have a whole hydropower program here at EPRI, looking at hydropower technologies, including pump storage hydro. Most pump storage resources are typically 10 hours, 12 hours type duration. There are a few that are longer. There are a few that are, potentially up to 100 hours or more. So I think that's an important technology to consider if we can expand those resources, make more projects like that, and use that as part of the portfolio options for capacity expansion. I think they could provide some good system benefits to include that technology.
All right. Thank you, Justin. Very much appreciate your insight and sharing your knowledge with us. We will go ahead and move on now to Rachel Wilson from Form Energy to learn about what's going on in her corner.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Just trying to pull up my slides. It looks like my screen sharing is disabled, so you would mind enabling that? Oh, there are my slides. Great, so thank you so much for this opportunity. I will say that I differ from my co-panelists in that my favorite topic is actually electric simulation modeling, with long duration storage being my second favorite topic. So happy to talk to you today about both of those things. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So I will just start with a quick introduction to the Form team. Right now, we're more than 400 employees strong, and we're spread over 3 offices in Massachusetts, in California, and in Pittsburgh. Then we just also recently announced our plans to build a manufacturing facility in Weirton, West Virginia. So that's going to be 55 acres and is expected to come online in coming years to produce multi-day storage at the gigawatt scale. Next slide. And I'm going to refer to the term multi-day storage. We use that to represent an asset class that is 24 hours plus in duration. So that differentiates slightly from long duration storage, which tends to be more in the 12 to 24-hour range. But Form's multi-day storage product is intended to transform the electric grid. And our iron air battery is intended to supply the grid with renewable energy during times of intermittency. And that can include typical renewable lull periods that happen at various times in the year, or during times of grid stress that is caused by extreme weather events. Strategic siting of Form's battery can help relieve both existing and future transmission constraints, relieving congestion, storing excess energy that would have otherwise been curtailed, and then discharging that energy during alternate hours. Next slide. So this slide speaks to the analytics that we use at Form to determine the value of our product in various markets. We use a proprietary internal model called Formware, and that is a capacity expansion and production cost model. But it differs from typical industry tools in a couple of important ways. And so first, whereas most models use a time sampling methodology like typical week or a number of representative days, peak on peak, those methods look at these representative days and extrapolate those patterns to the rest of the year. Formware, on the other hand, models 8,760 chronological hours in a year, and it performs the capacity expansion by looking at all of those hours in the same time sample. And so the second way is that industry models typically look at a typical weather year meaning they use a single hourly load profile, single hourly profiles for the different types of renewable technologies like wind and solar. And we find that resource builds in an optimal portfolio are highly sensitive to these profiles. And so the use of profiles based on different weather conditions are going to yield different optimized portfolios. Formware has the capability to perform a co-optimization. So it takes into account multiple weather years, looking across all of these different variations in load and generation profiles and determining the single least cost resource build that can meet demand over a range of different conditions. Next slide. So I've mentioned renewable lulls. We've heard the term Dunkelflaute. Jeremy mentioned renewable droughts. We're all referring to the same thing. And this slide provides some examples of studies that have been done on these multi-day lulls in different parts of the country. And in order to overcome these lulls in a high renewable grid, you can substantially overbuild your renewables in order to make sure that there's enough energy on your system to meet load in all hours, even during these drought periods or lull periods. But this is going to get more challenging as land availability becomes more limited and it's more difficult to site new generating technologies. So multi-day storage is a great solution to this problem of renewable lulls. It also allows us to avoid this renewable overbuild and ultimately saves money for customers, as we have heard from both of the previous panelists. Next slide. So Form believes that our iron air technology is the best for multi-day storage purposes on the grounds that are listed here: cost, safety, scale, and durability. Our batteries rely on iron and air, and these are materials that are plentiful and allow us to manufacture our product ultimately at about 1/10 the cost of lithium-ion batteries. Next slide. And here we have our announced commercial projects to date, the most recent being our two 10-megawatt projects with Xcel Energy. One of those is going to be sited in Becker, Minnesota, and the second in Pueblo, Colorado. But our first project that we expect to come online is with Great River Energy, and that is a 1.5 megawatt project in Cambridge, Minnesota, with an online date of 2024. Next slide. So these next two slides are previewing studies that are nearing completion, and so they haven't yet been released, but you get a special preview today. And so this first slide that we're looking at comes from a white paper that we're writing that looks at how New York can meet its decarbonization goals using a variety of long duration and multi-day storage technologies. And this looks quite similar to the chart that Justin just put up that examined 3 scenarios with the 3 different technology types included. And so this graphic shows annual system costs that are associated with the least cost resource portfolio in our 3 different scenarios. And the one on the far right, which is called no LDOs, includes storage with durations that are 12 hours or less. So this is all lithium-ion technologies. The middle portfolio, we call this the no MDS case. And this adds in addition to those shorter duration storage technologies, adds in technologies that are 12 to 24 hours in duration. And then the scenario on the far left is called all tech, and it includes both long duration and multi-day storage technologies. And here, the technologies that fit into this multi-day category are Form's iron ore battery and hydrogen. And so as you can see from this chart, inclusion of the full range of LDOs and MDS techs lowers the overall resource build. And it also lowers the total investment that is going to be necessary to achieve New York's decarbonization goals. You can see that the cost savings of the all tech portfolio relative to the no LDOs tech is about $12.9 billion a year for New York in 2040. Next slide. So this slide comes from a different study. This is an upcoming analysis of ISO New England, and it shows the dispatch of 2 different resource portfolios over a typical winter week. The top plot includes our multi-day storage asset class. And in that particular portfolio optimization, we see that inclusion of a multi-day storage resource results in a much lower solar build. And so as a result, we see a really strong relationship between offshore wind and multi-day storage. And then the first 2 days of the week, you can see that our storage asset is charging from excess offshore wind, and then it discharges over this next 3-day period in which we see a general drop in offshore wind output. We can compare that to the lower plot. And the lower plot includes only lithium-ion storage that is less than 12 hours in duration again. And the lack of longer duration storage in this portfolio leads to an increase in additional solar of about 23 gigawatts of capacity relative to the portfolio that includes multi-day storage. And in this case, that solar overbuild is necessary to be able to charge the storage resources sufficiently to be able to discharge during this same lull period. And we see in the bottom plot that this is broken up into, chunks that represent those nighttime hours, as opposed to being, a more continuous lull in the upper chart, which has less solar generation. Next slide. And this is the last one. So in addition to the technological challenge of actually building batteries, we also face the challenge of building the market for long duration and multi-day storage technologies. And so there's obviously some hesitancy around all of these new technologies that we're talking about today that have yet to be commercially proven at scale. So the first step we have on this list is to deploy a number of demonstration projects in the 2025 to 2026 timeframe to accelerate the learning and development around all of these different technologies. The next step we have here is to plan. And I highlighted in an earlier slide the capabilities of Formware, in part to demonstrate the ways in which traditional utility planning needs to evolve in order to better capture the dynamics of these new storage technologies. And I would also speak to Anna's question as well and say that, we in our modeling see, when we model different technologies, see them complementing each other in a number of ways. And so modeling seems to be very hungry for particular asset types to serve particular needs. And when you model, a single compressed air energy storage resource type, you're not going to allow those different technologies to perform up to their best capabilities. And so I think it's obviously a much more sophisticated and better method of planning to include as many of these storage assets as you can to really figure out which durations are needed on your system. But the third point we have in our list is to procure. And we're seeing recognition in the various wholesale markets that this is something that really needs to be done. And the ISOs and RTOs are thinking of a number of innovative ways to try and procure these different resource types. Then lastly, we have design markets, and it's last on this list in part because it will take the most time and effort to actually execute. And so we need to reform some of the traditional metrics that we've used in system planning to recognize these different characteristics that these various resources are bringing to the grid. And, with that reform, we can then attempt to value these resources more appropriately. And with that, I have my last slide, which has my contact information. And thank you so much.
No, thank you, Rachel. I feel like we could go back to that last slide and spend an hour or two on each one of those bullet points. And I wish we had the time for that, but I don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure everyone here is our level of nerd on this kind of stuff, so we won't do that. We do have a few questions in the chat, though. Question from Alicia: what do you think are the main markets that LDS, the long duration storage like Form Energy, will operate? What are your primary use cases you're seeing?
Sure. Julia mentioned this, and there are a number of use cases for long duration storage that apply to Form as well. We see ourselves as being able to alleviate transmission congestion at particular nodes. We are a reliability asset, helping to firm renewables to create a constant and predictable level of renewable energy on the system. We tend to find that the patterns that are associated with wind tend to be most beneficial for our particular technology. I believe it was Julia who showed kind of a diurnal pairing, or maybe it was Justin, the pairing of solar with lithium ion and how those two can complement each other. Wind obviously tends to be more variable, more uncertain on a day-to-day basis. And so that tends to work well for multi-day storage.
Okay. And then as a follow-up question, Alicia was wondering what the round trip efficiency is for your project, for your product.
It's about 40% at this point in time. We decided to focus our efforts first on cost and bringing the cost of our technology down to get a widespread deployment. At which point, not to say that RT isn't a topic of interest, but it was secondary to that cost question. So RT is certainly on the list. We tend to think of ourselves as comparable to a gas peaker plant. And so when put in that context, it makes the lower RT compared to lithium ion more understandable. And the best way to see the benefit of iron air is to put it into a resource portfolio and see how its performance works with other resources.
All right, thank you. All right, so at this point, I'm going to ask Justin and Julia to rejoin us for our closing panel discussion. We've got a couple questions here that we can start with, but folks, if you have other questions that we haven't got to yet or things that are kicking around in your head, now's the time to get them out there. I wanted to start by circling back, as I promised, to let's see, where did Patrick's question. So with the enormous mineral mining required for producing battery materials, how can these remote operations be powered quickly by anything other than fossil fuels? So interesting question here. How can you use storage to help its own supply chain?
It's great that there are a variety of technologies that can do this, and also in partnership, as Rachel was mentioning. But when you're looking at bringing in clean energy, you need that constant stream and the reliable components. So we did a report on thermal energy storage showing that some of our members, including Rio Tinto and South32, who own mines around the world, really want to move into this new paradigm of clean energy, but they need that temperature and they need that heat and they need the constant power. So they are willing to make the transition, and they're looking at different technologies. That's why they're members of the council, because they see the value add, they see the reality, they see that they can get the range and temperatures from different long duration storage technologies and have that, as Rachel noted, replacement of gas plants and gas plant peakers. And I put a link in the chat of the report that shows the various case examples, and that we also show the modeling benchmarking that we did to look at the cost and the comparable today, like how we can actually be the same cost as gas and lower with electric boilers.
All right, thank you. Rachel, Justin, any thoughts on that? The mining question, remote operations question?
So I can say that, we are looking at ways to green our supply chain in the future. Jeremy, you mentioned that, we can use our own product to help green our supply chain. And that is certainly something that we are looking at and investigating. Green hydrogen is also an option. And at this point, when we do our life cycle calculations, we have found that the benefits in terms of CO2 emissions reductions that we see when our capacity is actually installed in the grid offset our emissions from production. So we are just, working on making that number even bigger going forward in terms of amount of CO2 that we're offsetting.
Great,
I would say when I think about remote mining operations, it strikes me as a possible use case for a low carbon fuel, right? So that's something that if you have a supply of low carbon hydrogen or low carbon ammonia or some other kind of fuel you can create, that might be a good example of where to use that. Unless it's a very large operation that can have its own mini grid of some sort that's renewable energy powered with storage and electric fleet vehicles. That would be another alternative way to look at that, I think.
Great, thank you all. And then we had a question from Anna towards the end of Rachel's presentation. I think kind of gets at a theme that was running through everyone's presentation today. So, Julia started us out with this big list of technologies that are out there. And Anna's question is, how do we, from a modeling perspective, start to narrow that list down? We obviously can't model 70 different types of energy storage. So how do we go logically about reducing that to, balancing that need for modeling fidelity with computing capability?
So I think you use a representative technology for each of those classes. We tend to break it up based on asset class. So using a multi-day storage with 24 hours plus duration, then that mid-range of 12 to 24 and anything less than 12. And obviously, the more resources you put into your model, the harder it has to think and the more time it takes to run your scenarios. So breaking it up that way can allow you to run your scenarios in a more efficient manner. But Justin, I'm sorry, you might have something different to say about that.
Yeah, Rachel, I was going to say the same thing. So that's the same approach we use at EPRI, is not exactly having 20 different technologies, but maybe 4 different technology types. They kind of capture the typical metrics for each a variety of technologies. And that's our approach that we use as well. So I think that's a good approach.
And you'll see that in the benchmarking that we did in our reports. So it's great that you'll see all of us kind of say the same things of how to make this work for the 4 different categories and the different durations.
Yeah. So, before coming to the lab, I worked as a utility regulator. And one of the things that we frequently heard from utilities as we push them to be more granular in their modeling, do things like 8760 modeling, was that it's a big load computationally. And when you're running, dozens of scenarios looking at different things, and you're trying to run 8760 for all those different scenarios, it takes a very long time. It takes a lot of computing capability. So, you've all talked about how some of the modeling modifications you've made to get to that more granular level. How have you handled that? What have you, how much does it take to run a model? Like what's a model runtime? What have you done to kind of balance that granularity with speed?
I can start and speak to this first. The modeling involves a number of trade-offs, and for a long time, the trade-off that was often made was this chronology. And so sampled days have been used, or representative weeks. As we are moving to a higher renewable grid, time becomes even more important, and other variables become slightly less important, I would say. So one way that Form has done this is to look at a single year at a time, modeling 2030, and then backing into the resource build that we need over time to meet what our 2030 portfolio looks like. And then a second way that we attempt to reduce our runtime is by grouping our thermal technologies, as opposed to modeling unit by unit for gas, coal, and oil. We tend to lump these by fuel type, and in that way tend to reduce our runtime, which allows us to model a greater chronology.
Yeah, I must admit that I'm not the modeling expert here at EPRI. I have colleagues who focus specifically and are certainly the authoritative top voices on using regen and how long it takes. But my understanding is that it's going to be a trade-off between the full factorial combination of all the scenarios you want to model and the amount of time it takes for a given run. But a given run, it's on the order of hours. It's not going to be weeks to do a given scenario. So we have pretty effective computational tools right now that we can use for modeling a healthy number of scenarios, but not infinite, of course. So we have to make some along the way.
And just to jump into to build on that, the partnership we're doing with EPRI and DOE on using supercomputers and other aspects will help us speed this up. And the information we're getting from the modeling in Europe and other countries also can share some of their best practices.
Yeah. Thanks, Julia. I was trying not to say just get a faster computer and it doesn't matter anymore, right? But that's what I'm do.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we can go ahead and I just want to say thank you, all 3 of you, for taking time to be with us here today and sharing your work with us. I got a lot out of it. I learned a lot, and I hope others did as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy, and to the amazing team at PNNL. You all do great work. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for having us today.
Yes, pleasure.
All right, and so before we close, I just want to remind everyone that the next webinar in our series will be coming up on April 13th. You'll be hearing from my incredibly talented colleague, Jen Yoshimura, who will be talking about some of the work we've been done looking at how energy storage can meet social equity objectives, how it can be used to drive the benefits closer to historically disadvantaged populations and really improve the way our system operates, make things more equitable. And she will say it much more concisely and effectively than I did because she's a pro at that. But thank you all. If you want to learn more about the Grid Storage Launchpad, please go to our site. We're very excited about this facility. We think it's really going to change the way that we research and develop new storage technologies, and we're really looking forward to it. And we hope to see you all on future webinars and engaging with us as we launch the GSL. Thank you.